Alan and Sean here from the Prancing Pony Podcast, welcoming you to the Tolkien Experience Podcast.
The Tolkien Experience Podcast is an attempt to bring the fan and scholarly communities together around our shared passion, the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. Each episode features a notable scholar or member of the fan community sharing their Tolkien experience.
And now we'll send you over to Sarah and Luke.
Thanks, Alan. I'm Luke Shelton.
And I'm Sarah Brown.
Every other week, we share with you an interview of a Tolkien scholar or fan.
That's right. In these interviews, one of us asks our guest to respond to 6 questions that help us learn about their personal Tolkien experience.
We are so excited to share this podcast with you. So without any further delay, let me introduce our guest. Today, I am so excited to share with you my interview of Elvella. Before we recorded the interview, she told me that she's a religion major and a classical piano major in college. She's entering her senior year, so please join me in wishing her the very best as she heads back into what I'm sure is going to be a very eventful year for her. She also told me about her background with Tolkien. She said that she likes the fandom and is a private writer of fanfiction. Unfortunately, she doesn't get the chance to engage with others about her fan experience very often, so I'm overjoyed that she decided to share her experience with us. So without any further ado, let's get right into the interview. Alright, Elvella, so why don't we go ahead and get started, and I'll ask you our first question.
Sounds good.
How were you introduced to Tolkien's work?
Oh, wow. That's actually something of a murky question for me, because I am aware that as Tolkien fans go, I am very young. Like, I am under 25. And so a lot of for most Tolkien fans, newer kind of Tolkien iterations have been kind of facts of life for me. Like the audiobooks, the full-length Rob Inglis audiobooks, my sister and I listened to those when I was a very little girl. We just had those playing at least twice when we were very young. That was my first, actually, exposure to The Lord of the Rings was the Rob Inglis audiobooks. And I'm not even sure how old I was when that first happened. But then they kind of drifted out of my consciousness because they are kind of lengthy and involved stories for little children to kind of grasp. And when I was in a classically homeschool program. Mm-hmm. So when I was around middle school age, I was assigned to read the Lord of the Rings books again. And it was then that I really got into them and they stuck. And that was when I became very much a Tolkien fangirl.
Yeah. So you were assigned them in the homeschool group. Is this something that your parents were interested in, or is it something like the larger homeschool group was reading together, or how did it come about that you were assigned Tolkien?
Well, my homeschooling program was it was kind of isolated, and it was something of a hodgepodge. So all of the resources that we had were things that were curated specifically by my mother. Mm-hmm. So our classical literature kind of program assigned us those readings kind of by itself. And one of the things I kind of like to remember about that particular program was that it had me reading like Epic of Gilgamesh, Code of Hammurabi, Beowulf, and Shakespeare, and all of that kind of literature. So Lord of the Rings was like the light, easy reading. It was the fun reading.
Yeah. It sounds like my wife, when she went to middle school, they did much the same thing. They threw a lot of things at her. As you read through The Lord of the Rings the first time, did you have someone to talk through it with, or was it very much kind of your own thing for homeschool?
It was kind of my own thing for homeschooling. Again, I didn't really have another person to talk about it with, especially because the kind of upbringing that I had was not, I'll put it this way. My family was all right with allowing the Chronicles of Narnia forgive me for the departure, because of the very, very blatant allegory.
Mm-hmm.
They were not as cool with Tolkien because it's not quite as blatantly there, and because there's wizards in it.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't really have a network of people that I could talk to about Tolkien.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm guessing Harry Potter was an absolute no-go.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. Sounds like a lot of people I knew growing up. So as you got into Tolkien's work, what is your favorite part of Tolkien's work now?
Currently, what's my favorite part? I think I would have to say the tale of Beren and Luthien. Mostly because I'm a very dramatic and romantic person, and everything about that story appeals to me. Yes, very much. I would say the tale of Beren and Luthien at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Has that always been your favorite part, or has it become a favorite recently? Was there another favorite part before that?
Beren and Luthien as my favorite is definitely a newer occurrence. Traditionally, my fave has been, since I discovered it, has been the Silmarillion. I
Mm-hmm.
found that when I was like about 16. And I was used to Shakespeare, I was used to the Bible, I was used to, Epic of Gilgamesh, so the style was not really that off-putting for me.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the time that I've been really into Tolkien, the Silmarillion has been kind of my darling.
Hmm.
But due to some not to get too far into it, but some mental and emotional stuff that I was going through, like I kind of really needed a story of a really fulfilling, beautiful, dramatic love story that ended well. And so Beren and Luthien very much was that for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been a remarkable thing in these interviews to be able to talk to people about how the parts of Tolkien that stick with them because for some reason when they read it, it really struck something with them at that point in their life. Um, so you're mentioning about needing that kind of story at that time sounds really, really familiar to a lot of what I've heard. Um, so that time when you read through Beren and Luthien and it kind of really resonated with your life, is that your fondest experience of Tolkien's work, or does a different experience stand out?
Well, fondest is a little bit of a difficult qualifier,
Mm-hmm.
but for pure nostalgia, I would say just the experience of hearing The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings on audiobook,
Hmm.
because, and as a musician, this probably won't surprise anyone who's listening, but audio memories mean a lot to me.
Hmm.
And as complicated as my feelings about certain parts of my life are, the Lord of the Rings audiobooks is hearing those and hearing them with my family and with my sister is one of the really the formative experiences of my life, and I couldn't give it up.
Hmm. Yeah. So, as someone who appreciates the audiobooks so much, how do you feel about the new audiobooks coming out? Are you excited or are you holding on to the old ones with all of your passion?
I'm sorry, excuse me?
The new ones that they just licensed from Andy Serkis.
I did not even realize that. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, he read the Hobbit in a live stream on YouTube a few months ago, and then they worked with the estate, so he's going to record another audio version of the Hobbit.
Honestly, that is more than okay with me. I'm very excited about that now that you've told me that that's a thing. I'll be on the lookout for that. Because as much as those first audiobooks, as much as those are part of my childhood and part of my memory, I'm very excited to see what The Hobbit will be like in its new audio form. I would love to try that.
Mm-hmm. I also am looking forward to new creative influences on the work, and hopefully we get a lot more to come. And I mean, certainly Amazon is piling onto that as quickly as possible. But before we dig too far down the adaptation tunnel, I'll redirect us with the next question. Has the way that you approach Tolkien's work changed over time?
Oh, absolutely, it has. It very much has. And I don't know what the average Tolkien listener's experience with religion and religious dialogue is, but my religious experience is very closely tied in with my experience of Tolkien. So I'm going to try and not let that dominate the conversation, but it does figure in. And it also ties into my experience writing fan fiction, because a thing that I have found to be true about myself is that whenever I find a new story that resonates with me very strongly, my instinctive response is to just write fan fiction for some reason. And so when it came to Tolkien fan fiction, and maybe part of this is because I knew that Tolkien was Catholic, but there would be an approach that I would have to Tolkien's work and creating fan works that would go something like, if he didn't say it, it's not true, and you can't have a take that's different from his, and you cannot dialogue with him about anything in his work. And again, I was never the most connected fandom person, but there would be occasions during which I would kind of argue fairly hotly with other people who were in my corners of the community, and I would be like, well, that's not canonical, that's not textual, and so you can't do that. As I got older and my awareness of myself started to change, my awareness of like what my religious life was started to change. Suddenly I went back, and when I would read Tolkien's work, there would be new things for me there that I hadn't seen before. And I was also beginning to see that, there are even points where Tolkien himself grew and evolved in his thinking over the course of writing his legendarium. And like, who am I to say that there's one way to interpret or write about Tolkien or Tolkien's work, when even he was not one thing all the time. And so, as a person in my early 20s, I'm now at a point where I can very comfortably say, where I'm very comfortable just allowing people around me and myself to converse, I think, with Tolkien, and hopefully to give ourselves and each other and Tolkien a lot more grace than I think I would have originally. So, to answer your question, yes, my relationship with Tolkien has very much changed.
Yeah, I think that's a really important lesson that you're talking about, going through that idea that, as I read, I create my own mental image, and I love that image because of what it means to me, but then realizing that other people don't have that. They have a very different picture that means a lot to them. And so I kind of, my first realization with that was, we were talking earlier about how when you first read the book, you didn't really have anyone to talk to. I was kind of the same way. And I actually decided I was going to write a research paper in my high school about The Lord of the Rings because I really liked it, and they said I could. And I was looking up different books to write the research paper, and no one ever told me this, but for some reason I just kind of assumed that all the authors of all the scholarly books I was reading were dead. And apologies to Tom Shippey, but he is not dead. And so I just had this one image that I felt like I had discovered this book and no one else really cared about it except for me. And so I got to make my own meaning of it. And so then when I started reaching out and experiencing other interpretations, I suddenly went, oh, these are different from mine. I have to defend mine.
Yeah, that was very much my experience too.
Yeah, and it wasn't till a bit later that I realized, oh, all of these interpretations can live together. And in fact, if you let them, they inform one another and they show us different ways to read the same thing. And so it just was a remarkable opening up, like you're talking about, of this realization that this book can mean so many things to so many different people. So I really like that you talked about that. So as you progressed and started getting more into fan fiction, did you participate in fan fiction very often, or did you participate in other parts of Tolkien fandom?
Sort of. It was my the way that I tended to go about writing fan fiction, really the way I still go about writing it. I talk about it in past tense, like I'm not still doing this. 95% of what I write is never seen by anyone. So people who knew me from the days when I was posting more regularly might think that I have stopped writing, and that's not really the case. It's just that I'm not really giving anyone access to anything that I write anymore. But I would have different like social media accounts where I would be and I mean, this is kind of this. I guess this was still sort of the days when fandoms were relatively decentralized. So I would kind of float around a couple of like Lord of the Rings fan sites, but other than that, I was, like I said, relatively isolated with regards to fandom. It was. I did have a few fandom friends, but that was kind of it. And I definitely got the impression when I would talk to these people that all of them, well, I don't know how tactfully I can say this. It sounded like all of them were white. So I was always very much at least a little bit disconnected from basically any person in fandom I interacted with. And I never met anyone in person.
Mm-hmm. That's something that the fandom in general has been dealing with a lot lately, is coming to grips with its own whiteness. Just because, it's always been very white. That's factual. You can look it up,
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't until recently that people actually started out pointing that that's a problem. And of course, a lot of people have always known that that's a problem, but um, I do think it's really important to hear voices like yours to where, it's not necessarily that people were using whiteness to be exclusionary, but if you're never able to talk with someone who is not white in the fandom, eventually you get the message that, okay, this is a white person's thing.
Yeah, I've heard people who are not white and not into Tolkien say that about Tolkien's work, and it really hurts my heart, but I don't know how to speak against that because what can I say exactly? Like, am I supposed to say, oh, this is totally not a thing that's not a fandom that's dominated by whiteness and white people, and a white approach to storytelling?
Mm-hmm. I do think that's something that we do need to have more public conversations about. I'm very much encouraged by the fact that we've been able to have more open conversations about it because of several of the recent events, and a lot of that's spurred on by movements in the larger world, like the protests on police brutality and things like that has then increased awareness of these aspects in other areas.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm really glad to see we're having a better awareness of it now. And I really hope that we can continue to build on it and actually have more of these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And so this kind of leads us into, this quandary over your experience with Tolkien and how that fits in. Do you ever feel like recommending Tolkien's work to someone else, and why or why not?
I will say absolutely 100%. I would recommend Tolkien's work to people, to anyone, and in whatever form they choose to is easiest for them to consume, whether that's these new audiobooks that are coming out, whether that's the films, and then maybe they find their way to the text from there, or if they like stumble upon the actual the books. And in large part, the reason for that is The Lord of the Rings is one of those stories that has a lot of heart, and it has a lot of gentleness. It's a strange term, I know, but it has a lot of compassion for the human condition that I think some more famous authors recently do not have, at least in my opinion. And there is, I believe, among certain authors who have patterned themselves after Tolkien. I can't name any names, obviously, but like there's this assumption that some of these authors have, and they write it into the worlds they create that it's there is nothing worthwhile about humankind, and there is nothing to hope for, and everything is brutal and hopeless and angry all the time. And Tolkien, even though there are deep pits of darkness and there's a lot of pain and a lot of suffering, there's also redemption, and there's hope, and there is joy, and sometimes the acts of kindness are the acts that are the most powerful. And I don't think there's I don't think there are enough stories like that are famous. And so, just even apart from its pure literary merit, really for the reason that it has a human beating heart, I would 100% recommend Tolkien to anyone.
Wow, I think that was a wonderful sentiment, and I really don't have anything to add to it. So I just want to take another moment to thank you so much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure having you on the podcast.
Oh, thank you.
We are so thankful that we have such gracious scholars and fans who want to share their Tolkien experience with us and with you.
We have a lot of fun making these podcasts.
So much fun. It's always exciting to talk to fans and scholars about their Tolkien experience.
If you want to know more about the ways to connect with this episode's guest that they mentioned in this interview, we provide show notes at tolkienexperience.com. Also, don't forget to follow the podcast on your favourite social media sites.
That's right. We're on Facebook as Tolkien Experience, and also on Twitter as @TolkienEXP. So don't forget to like, follow, share, and comment, because we love interacting with you just as much as we enjoy talking with our guests. You can also follow our personal Twitter accounts. I am @LukeB.Shelton.
You can also look for me on Twitter, where I am @AaronLPalmadill. You can find the podcast on all major podcast services, including Apple, Stitcher, and YouTube.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. We truly hope that, in a way, it contributes to your own Tolkien experience.